am Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitre College, Delhi University. This lecture is second part of the lecture titled David Hume, the Philosopher and the Essayist. Now, in the previous part of the lecture, we discussed David Hume as a philosopher and his contribution to the English essay, how he brought about a slight change to the English periodical essay, and talked about talked about philosophical ideas and took them to the masses. So he utilized the essay form for this purpose, and most importantly, he did not publish his essays as part of magazines which would appear periodically, but instead he put together his essays and brought them out in the form of a book. So that was a slight difference where we notice Hume as compared to the other essayists of 18th century. Now, in this particular lecture, we are going to pick up one essay for discussion, and this essay figures in his book Essay, Political, Literary and Philosophical. So, that is the work from where we are going to discuss, and this is essay number 12, and it is titled On Civil Liberty. Right now, just as we look at the title itself, we know that here he is going to talk about a subject of political importance, right. He is talking about the idea of what form of governance that a particular society has, and the impact that such a governance would have in two different people. So, in this particular essay, he devotes time and space to thinking about different forms of government and how they contribute to the or they impede the development of let us say arts, commerce, trade, and the overall impact that a particular structure of governance has on a society. So, you see, of course, this is while a very this is a topic or an idea that is steeped in political thought, but at the same time, if you look at the other essays, now you see this is a very small one excerpt of this huge volume of essays. In fact, here you would notice, if you look at the actual book, it has over 50 essays, right. In fact, 50 is also a very small number. It comprises different parts. So, but from there we picked on, we chose this particular essay for discussion today. Okay. So, what we will do is that we will look at different portions of the text, and from there understand what exactly was Hume doing. So, just to give you a sense once again, he is here thinking about different kinds of governments or different ways of governance. For instance, a monarchy, for instance, and what he calls as an absolute government, a republic, right, and a society that has civil liberty. Okay, that how these different forms of or the structures of governance then impact different developments that are noticed at the time. Okay. So, the first thing that we observe when we read this essay is that Hume is actually secular in thought, right, and he is very open to question, and he does not at all believe in absolutes. Of course, as is the case with philosophers, they will never preach absolutes, right. That is in fact, I would say one of the distinctions of a philosophical thought, that it is open. Okay. And particularly vis-a-vis Hume, we see that he is secular and he is also open to question. He is open to revising what he says, his argument, right. So, we will just look at this, that how do we come to this observation about Hume? So, for that, let's look at this initial excerpt from the essay. And he says, and I quote, "Having intended in this essay to make a full comparison of civil liberty and absolute government, and to show the great advantages of the former above the latter, I began to entertain a suspicion that no man in this age was sufficiently qualified for such an undertaking, and that whatever anyone should advance on that head would, in all probability, be refuted by further experience and be rejected by posterity." Now, you see, what is he saying here? A very, if you read it closely, it says a lot. Foremost, he tries to discuss that what is going to be his primary area of concern in this essay, which is what he says, that I am going to undertake a comparison of civil liberty and absolute government. And then he also tells you where he stands. He says that he's going to talk about the great advantages of civil liberty and over the absolute government. So, very clearly we know where he stands, right? But then he goes on to say that at the same time, I am very well aware that in this age, right, nobody is qualified, he says, for such an undertaking, which means what? He is taking a very humble stance. He says that even as I will undertake this comparison, but I am doing this fully aware that no man is completely qualified for such an undertaking, which means what? That what I do is limited by my capacities. Okay. And then he goes on to say that whatever anyone should advance or should say on this subject can be refuted by, look at the word, further experience and be rejected by posterity. Now, please connect this to what we were discussing in the first half of the lecture, where we said that David Hume was an empiricist who based knowledge on experience. So, here we see him. He says that whatever that I am going to talk about, the comparison between the two governments that I bring out today, can be refuted by further experience. It means as societies advance, as civilizations go further, what I have said today in this essay can be refuted in future and, as he says, be rejected by posterity. Okay. So, that is what we meant, that he is very open, he is very secular, he is open to question and revision. That is one of the central aspects of Hume's approach, and right at the outset of this essay, we also got a glimpse of him as an empiricist as well. Okay? Now, the next thing that we say and that we observe in his essays is that he is very rational in thought and approach. So, he is driven by reason, right? And he cites other thinkers of the time when he is making a point. Okay? So, even though being an empiricist, he talks about sensory experience and gives importance and a central place to that, but we also see him adopt a rational approach when he is writing. Okay. And we will notice this in this next excerpt that comes next in sequence in the essay, and he says, and I quote, "It had been observed by the ancients that all the arts and sciences arose among free nations. From these two experiments," that is, he talks about Greece and Rome, "of which each was double in its kind, and showed the fall of learning in absolute governments as well as its rise in popular ones. Longinus thought himself sufficiently justified in asserting that the arts and sciences could never flourish but in a free government. And in this opinion, he has been followed by several eminent writers in our own country. Unquote. Now, what is the point he is making here? First, he says that all arts and sciences, it has been observed by the ancients, has flourished or arose among what he calls as the free nations. And then he gives examples of Greece and Rome. Okay. In Greece, he said that it took some time for the arts to flourish, but when Rome came under or opened up to this kind of a governance, we saw a flourishing of arts over there. And he says that these experiments, so to say, or these examples, he would mean, of Greece and Rome, show that how learning cannot flourish in absolute governments. So he to actually discuss this, he gives the example of Greece, and then he says, and then he transitions to Rome, that Rome, where there was no absolute government, over there was a flourishing of arts, right? And then he substantiates what he says by quoting Longinus. Now, Longinus, we all know, was another very, very famous thinker of the ancient period, right? And it says that even he asserted that arts and sciences could never flourish except in a free government. And then he says that this thought has also been substantiated by several eminent writers in our own country, that is England, or for that matter UK primarily, right? So this tells us that how David Hume presented his argument with enough examples and also reference to evidence too. He talked about, or he brought in discussion what other thinkers also said about absolute government and a liberal society. Okay? From there, we come to a third important observation about his style of writing, and also what he says about the civil liberty and absolute government. We say is that when he is discussing the topic in the essay, he also introduces contradictions. Now, what do we mean by that? He will say one thing first, he will agree to that, and then later on he will refute the same thing. And that is nothing but a very, very evolved way of writing. It shows a mind that is open to question. It shows a mind that is open to possibilities, right? And which would also entertain these possibilities, right? So, how do we see him introducing contradictions in his argument? We will notice this in this next quote, where he further takes his discussion forward about the absolute governments and the civil liberty, right? And he says, and I quote, "But what would these writers have said to the instances of modern Roman of Florence, of which the former carried to perfection all the finer arts of sculpture, painting, music, as well as poetry, though it groaned under tyranny and under the tyranny of the priests?" So he is first giving an example of Rome, and he says that what would these writers say about Rome, that at some point of time was under tyranny, but well, fine arts, sculpture, painting, music flourished very well over there. So he is presenting one counterpoint, okay, and let's read further. He says, "But the most eminent instance of the flourishing of learning in absolute governments is that of France." Then he gives another example, that how, now you see, if you notice that in the beginning of the essay, he had mentioned that no learning or arts can flourish in absolute governments, right? That's the point that he made. But now he's presenting a counterpoint with examples, and he's giving the example of France. He's saying that the most eminent instance of the flourishing of learning in absolute government is that of France, which scarcely ever enjoyed any established liberty and yet has carried the arts and sciences as near perfection as any other nation, unquote. Okay, so what is he doing here? He began the essay by stating learning and arts cannot flourish in absolute governments. And then he gives an example, a counterpoint to his own point that, well, what do we then think of countries such as France that have had periods of extreme tyranny, but well, at the same time we all are aware that it was also the center for various art movements. He says, how does that happen? Okay, so we notice that it's a very particular and a very unique way of discussing a topic or an idea. He is not philosophizing. He is not speaking as if speaking from a pulpit, as if he knows it all. But he leaves areas for questioning. He questions his own self, his own argument in the middle of his write-up. And that is what is very, very remarkable about David Hume. Okay. Now, in a similar vein, not only does he, gives a counterpoint to what he had just now said, but at the same time, we also see him cast a critical glance towards England as well, right? England and, for that matter, Scotland, because he was Scottish from Edinburgh. Okay. Now, let's see how do we see this happening? Where do we see in the essay that he casts a critical glance towards England and Scotland? He says, and I quote, "The elegance and propriety of style have been very much neglected amongst us. We have no dictionary of our own language and scarcely a tolerable grammar. The prose of Bacon, Harrington and Milton is altogether stiff and pedantic, though their sense be excellent. Men in this country have been so much occupied in the great disputes of religion, politics and philosophy that they had no relish for the seemingly minute observations of grammar and criticism," unquote. Now, what does he say here? He is criticizing, the men of letters or the development of literature and arts in his own country. He says that we do not have, even what he calls it, a scarcely tolerable grammar, right? The propriety of style is missing. And he says, if at all, there are certain writers such as Bacon and Milton who write well and they are the established names, but their writing is, or their prose, he says, is stiff and pedantic. It means that they don't seem to experiment much, right? And then he goes on to say that, we are so occupied by disputes of religion, politics and philosophy that we have no time to spend on observations of grammar and criticism, right? So, once again, casting a critical glance at his own surroundings. Next, we say that he also discusses not just art, but also commerce in absolute governments. Okay, so you see how very systematically he is discussing different aspects of absolute governments and in connection with art. So far he's made a point that art and learning cannot flourish in absolute governments, and while he has also given counterpoints to that, but his stance remains that it's not possible to flourish. Now, from there he transitions not only to talk about art but also about commerce. Okay, so once again giving range to his argument. So he says, and I quote, "Commerce, therefore, in my opinion, is apt to decay in absolute governments, not because it is there less secure, but because it is less honorable. A subordination of ranks is absolutely necessary to the support of monarchy. Birth titles and place must be honoured above industry and riches. And while these notions prevail, all the considerable traders will be tempted to throw up their commerce in order to purchase some of these employments to which privileges and honours are annexed. Unquote. So, here what does he say? He kind of transitions from a discussion of arts and literature to commerce. So, he says that in an absolute monarchy, it's not that just learning and arts cannot flourish, but even commerce cannot flourish. And then he gives us a reason why. He says because in such a system of governance, there is more importance, significant emphasis laid on birth titles, on place. As we know, if we talk about monarchy, the title that one carries is a defining feature of who you are and what status you hold in society, right? So that's what it says, that it's the birth titles, it's your lineage that is honored even above industry and riches. So no matter how rich you are, but it's your lineage, it's your family, it's your legacy that is first and foremost seen as significant. So he says that in such a society where subordination of ranks is absolutely necessary, then where do we find a space for those who do well economically? And that is why commerce is also meant to not flourish in such a society. Now you see, he takes examples, okay, but if we just for once slightly step away from his argument and we see, what is he trying to say? He is actually trying to prove that how absolute governments are not very amenable for human progress. And very smartly, he has picked up two very important aspects of societies: finances, or the economical aspect, that is commerce, and the arts, just the opposite, which shapes ideas, which shapes sensibilities, right? And he said both of them cannot flourish in absolute governments. So, but at the same time, you would have noticed that he does not preach about this. He does not say that this is the only truth, but instead he begins by saying, what I am saying in this essay can very well be refuted, questioned, challenged by further experience in times to come. So, leaving space once again for questioning his own belief too. That is what I would say sums up Hume's greatness, right? His greatness as a philosopher, as a thinker, and even as an essayist. And then we said that how he also brings in contradictions to his own point. He brings in references to substantiate his point. So many ways and means adopted by Hume to drive home the point and to build a discussion around a very, very seminal concern, that is forms of governance. And what is really I would say impressive is how he chooses these two very important aspects of society, art and commerce, economics and ideas, to discuss a form of governance, right? That shows a very, very fine thought that goes behind this particular essay. And we look at the last point of observation about Hume's essay. We say that how he argues from both sides before giving a final opinion of his. That's once again what highlights his importance. Now let's see how this comes about in this essay, and I'll quote. This is towards the end of the essay, right? And he says, "But though all kinds of government be improved in modern times, yet monarchical government seems to have made the greatest advances towards perfection. it may now be affirmed of civilized monarchies what was formerly said in praise of republics alone, that they are a government of laws and not of men. It must, however, be confessed that though monarchical governments have approached nearer to popular ones in gentleness and stability, they are still inferior. Unquote. What does this mean? Now, do you notice the two parts of this quotation from the essay? On the one hand, he says, well, the monarchies have also come very close to republics, right? The features of monarchies and what one can say that the aspects of republics that need to be celebrated or which are celebrated, or the reason why republics are praised, monarchies have somewhat also adopted that, he says. Okay. He says, and that's why even monarchies are now being called a government of laws and not a government of men. Okay. But he says, he then gives a counterpoint. He says it must be confessed that though the monarchical governments have approached nearer to popular ones in gentleness and stability, they are still inferior. Unquote. So you see now how he talks from both sides. He gives opinions. He discusses the issue from both sides. He does give due where it's one can say that he does give space where it's due. For example, he does acknowledge that okay, yes, monarchical governments have also improved. It's not that they are absolutely wrong or they are absolutely abominable, so to say, but he says that still they are not as amenable for social growth as a republic would be. They are still inferior, he says, and then he also further elaborates on why he calls them inferior. But the point for us to notice over here is the way he argues, right? So in this lecture we have noticed then through a close reading of the essay on civil liberty that how he discusses the two forms of government and talks about which form of governance then actually helps the cause of social progress and social advancement. And very clearly he stands on the side of a republic and not on the side of a monarchical, or as he calls it, an absolute government, and therefore establishing him as a thinker who's secular, who is open to the cause of freedom, and we also see this expressed not only in his ideas, in his themes, but also in his approach, in his form, in how he writes or how he composes his essay, right? And we saw that because he brings in questions, he brings in contradictions, he questions his own argument, but at the same time, he also makes a point. While he discusses the given thought from multiple perspectives, opening up different dimensions, but at the end, he also does justice by giving or by making clear where he stands, right? So this is one essay by David Hume, and I hope that after this you will be able to, you would be intrigued to look at other essays by Hume from this volume and also the others. Thank you.